Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a subscriber ask a question which kind of started a little short conversation between he and I the other day, and I'm going to flip that in for you guys right here. And it kind of makes me bring up a point because I want to be a devil's advocate here for a minute, because everyone always talks about the negative ethics of drug use in sports and the negative ethics and the poor morals around the cheating in sports here. But nobody ever talks about the other end of it. The actual negatives to the athletes and to sports of actually trying to make sports clean and the actual banning of drugs and the testing of drugs. Nobody ever talks about the negative ethics of that and how that actually harms athletes and makes things unfair. So it seems like only one side of the coin is ever discussed and never the other. So let me put on my +5 cap of weaponsmithing, do a little crafting, and see if I can skill up. And let's talk about this. All right, cliff notes for people who don't know. Drug testing itself can actually force athletes, because pretty much all sports have to use drugs to be competitive at the top levels today, because the drug testing has never been good enough to clear it all out. Never will be. That it forces athletes to sometimes use more dangerous and more toxic drugs than they would have otherwise used to get the same benefits. And it allows for financial, socioeconomic, and political factors to actually determine who's going to win and who's going to get caught on drug testing or not. So it actually disenfranchises people in certain American sports or certain national level sports from getting the best jobs or winning the scholarship or going pro, because they just don't have the resources to be able to afford to cheat as well as the competitors, because they come from a more impoverished background. And it allows politics and money of wealthier, more influential countries to sometimes allow their athletes to get through easier through testing than countries that are poor with less influence. So there's a lot of negatives going on here. All right, first of all, let's discuss the toxic end of it. All right, what people need to understand, I'll go back to one of the first examples, back when the drug testing was a bit more crude than it is today. Historically, if we go back 20 or 30 years, the hardest anabolic steroids to test for were generally orals, meaning most injectable steroids had much, much longer detection times. Some of them, crazily enough, had detection times in urine of up to 12 to 18 months. Things like nandrolone decoinate, there were people who had come off of it for over a year and it could still be detected in their urine, the metabolites. But there were orals that sometimes only had a 72-hour detection time, or a 7-day detection time. And even basic testosterone esters like testosterone cypionate and enanthate for a long time still had like a 10 to 12 week detection time in urine. So again, all these safer, non-toxic substances could be detected for months. But some of the more toxic ones, the ones that are generally considered by medical research to be more toxic to the body, more toxic to your liver, more harsh on your lipid profiles. In short, the substances most likely to cause liver problems or heart problems in the long term were the easiest to get through the drug testing, because they just couldn't be detected. Most of them had detection times in urine of days and sometimes only a week or two. Even in the worst cases, it was like 3-week detection times for the most easy ones to detect. And the most difficult, things like turinabol, was like 3 days. So if you hadn't taken it in 3 days, you would come clean on urine. On the best testing, the Olympic level testing for many, many, many years, up until actually just a couple of years ago, that one. So when you look at it from that perspective, people need to understand, because other athletes are going to be cheating, they're all competing at the international level for trophies, prizes, or they're competing for a scholarship. They're competing to go pro and make millions of dollars. And they're competing against other athletes who are all going to cheat also, because that's the way it's always been. They're all going to cheat. They're forced to use something. And if all they can afford, and sometimes the only thing available would be the more toxic substances, a lot of these oral drugs, what do you think the athlete's going to be forced to do if he wants to be competitive? They have to take more toxic drugs. So the actual drug testing itself didn't do anything to dissuade the actual use, because it's a competitive environment. That's the reason they want to test so much, is because they know the athletes are going to do it, because they want to win. They'll do anything to win. And sometimes you're talking about someone coming from a background of nothing, of absolute poverty. And that's really, really common in sports at the college level, at least in the United States. Getting that scholarship, getting free degree because of their sports ability, That's worth cheating for. All right? That is worth taking a drug against the rules to help you get an education. If you come from a background of complete poverty and your only shot at getting it is that athletic scholarship and keeping that athletic scholarship, you damn well better believe they're going to take a drug. And you can't blame them. It's their one shot to make it. And they're going to do whatever it takes. Same thing, they come from an impoverished background, they get through that scholarship, they want to go pro. This is the only skill, the only ability they've ever had. Oftentimes it would get them anything more than a working class or lower income. A lot of these people have no skills. Again, impoverished backgrounds, impoverished education systems in their area. Chance to become a millionaire, the one shot in life, you're damn well they're going to spend $100 and take a drug, even if it's against the rules, if they know they can get away with it. And everyone they're competing for that same position with is going to do the same thing. They don't have a choice because everyone else is going to do it. And they're going to get through the testing. And the testing then, because if they want to have that shot to make it, they've got to take a more toxic drug because of the drug testing to get the exact same performance benefit that a drug that has very, very low side effects and very risk would have by comparison. Again, testosterone esters, nandrolone, these things have zero toxicity in the body. They barely negatively affect cholesterol. They're relatively safe. Compare them to all the orals that have a very measurable amount of toxicity in the body. So basically it forces these athletes to use something more toxic, and this went on for decades until testing changed more and more. That's how they got around it. They just used orals. And they accepted the risk that there was a toxicity, the risk they had to take. So you've got that factor right there of it forcing athletes to use what will pass through testing, not what's going to harm their health, at least. And that's always what this is about. It's about the health of the athletes. We don't want them to feel forced to take a drug. Well, they have to anyways, because everyone's just going to find the drugs that pass the drug testing. For whatever their level of testing is, for whatever their level of economic outreach is. And for many athletes, for many years, it turned out to be, I got 4 different drugs to choose from that'll give me the same benefit, and the more toxic one is the one I can get through testing with. I'm using it, my teammates are using it, my competition is using it. I'm going to have to use it anyways if I want to be competitive. It doesn't help. All it does is hurt the athlete's health because they have to pick what's going to get through the testing, not what's the least toxic to their body. So this idea that the drug testing or banning drugs in sports is good for the athlete's health, how? It forces them to have to only consider how easily the drug gets through testing, not whether it's going to kill them or not. How does that help their health? It does the opposite. It hurts the athletes, and no one ever talks about that end of it. And it's ridiculous that we don't. Then we've got the economic end of it. Same thing. We take athletes who come from impoverished backgrounds. So they're trying to get that scholarship. They're competing with the other kids to get a scholarship. They come from a background where they don't have access to a lot of money. Other guy comes from middle class or even family that might make $100,000 a year. They've got disposable income. Dad knows his son's got a better chance of a scholarship if he gets him on some drugs that'll get him through testing. In fact, he's got a buddy who's a doctor who can prescribe them. Other kid's family doesn't have any money. See the problem? And the guy already knows his son can get through the drug testing with it. And the other kid doesn't have the money to afford drugs that'll get through testing. He doesn't have the resources to find them. He doesn't have access to them. And he might be forced to try to be competitive to take something, again, not only more toxic, but that might get him caught easier. The other kid has access to money, resources. He can get drugs easier that slip through the testing. So therefore, the drug testing itself gives you the advantage to the high school kid trying to get a scholarship because daddy's going to help him pay for it because he has access to resources. Is that fair? If it was a free-for-all and there was nothing else on it, they would all just use whatever they could afford and they would all get probably equal results. And again, people are going to say, well, that's not fair because then they're still forced to use drugs. Well, they're forced to use drugs anyways half the time. They're competing against people who are on drugs anyways. You're not changing that. All you're doing is allowing the kid with more money whose family has access to drugs and can afford the drugs that will get him through testing easier to get the scholarship. Not saying that happens all the time, but it's a factor no one talks about. And it definitely becomes a much, much bigger factor when these kids are trying to go pro. A lot of these guys don't have much money. Same thing. Their family's got a little more money. They're on scholarship. You got one guy who comes from an impoverished background. The other guy goes to his dad and says, hey, I know my friends hooked me up with a doctor in a lab that makes undetectable steroids. Just like Balco Labs. You guys remember that? Balco Laboratories made undetectable steroids, but they charged most of their clients $5,000 to $10,000 a year. And they had thousands of athletes on their roster. Guy who wants to get $1 million contract in the NFL goes to his family and says, hey, I need $5,000 to $10,000. This will give double my chances of getting drafted, double my chances of making millions. I'll pay you back with interest on the loan, Dad, after I get this. The other individuals come from a more impoverished background, can't come up with $10,000. So they're going to have to compete with whatever they can find, whatever they can do. Whereas, and again, the guy whose family has money, and if he has equal ability and talent, it's going to give him the edge. But again, no one wants to talk about that. They don't realize that people with money can get access to undetectable drugs really, really easily. All they have to have is money. If their family has money, they'll be approached oftentimes by people who say, hey, I know someone at the lab. I have a connection up there at this place. Let's, you come up with the money, we'll go sort it out. They're going to be approached because people know. It's no big secret. Same thing when it comes to professional level sports. The drug testing, instead of just everyone being able to use cheap stuff, sometimes the cheapest stuff is the most effective and the least harmful to the body. You'd be surprised. Again, basic testosterone. And sometimes even growth hormone, but basic testosterone. The primary PED out there is dirt cheap. Anybody can afford it. Poor countries can afford it. Hell, they make it in third world countries sometimes. In the same quality of pharmaceutical grade that we make here in America, but it's easily detected. So, countries that are poor don't have as many scientists, as much medical stuff, not as much money. They're forced to scrape by with whatever they can find and hopefully get through testing with, whereas in the wealthier, more influential countries, well, they can afford doping programs. They can afford to make sure that their athletes come up clean, to get them better drugs, to get through testing easier. They might cost more, but they can afford it. They can afford their own research programs to make it happen. How about the bribing officials to look the other way? How about the fact that you say that you're America or you're Russia and you have a lot of money and influence, and you better look the other way? The international level, the actual drug testing itself puts the wealthy, more influential countries at an advantage because they're more likely for both medical and resource reasons as well as political influence to have more athletes pass their tests who are on drugs. They have access to, because of those reasons, a wider variety of drugs. Oftentimes can get away with higher doses of drugs, all sorts of things going on. They have a very clear advantage when it comes to the drug testing itself of being able to use more drugs and a wider variety of drugs and get through the testing. So again, it puts wealthier countries in an advantage, and people will think it's the other way. Oh, the wealthy countries can afford steroids. Well, the poor countries can afford steroids too. They can afford some of the cheaper stuff. Well, the cheaper stuff oftentimes gives just as good of a performance advantage. It's oftentimes more expensive stuff, designer stuff that gets through the testing easier, and sometimes it costs 100 or 500 times as much for the same power of drug because it's designed to be undetectable. Until the next batch of testing comes out, the new drugs go into the rotation. They make new stuff every year. A lot of these labs do. You see the problem here? And again, also the political influence. It puts wealthier, more influential countries at a distinct advantage. And if the drug testing is removed, that advantage would go away. So there's your problems. And these are very real problems. And no one wants to talk about the ethics of this because it's always, oh, we want to protect the health of the athletes. Well, you're not. That's already been shown with the whole issue for orals that went on for decades. It harmed the health of the athletes because they had to use something anyways. And it also starts to really break down because everyone's like, well, we don't want the children to know that all their champions are on drugs. Well, you're not teaching your children a very good life lesson. Why don't we teach our children the truth of the world? What's the truth of the world? Do you think the world is all sunshine and rainbows and everyone who plays fair comes out on top? Or do the most ruthless and cutthroat people make it to the top? Look at the people you have running for president of the United States. Stop and think about that. They get to the top. You're talking about some ruthless ass people. Insanely ruthless ass people. Do you think anyone in this world makes it to the top of anything by being fair and being nice? Or do they get there by cheating, lying, killing? You don't think Hillary Clinton got to where she is without having a few dozen people bumped off? Better look at her track record. So again, the truth of the matter is we're not teaching the children how to make it in this world. In this world, in the world that we've created, people who are willing to lie, cheat, and kill their way to the top oftentimes make it to the top. That's sometimes the people who become billionaires. Those are sometimes the people that become heads of state. That's the real world. Why don't we teach our children how the world actually works? We sell them these utopian ideas about fair play. That's not the world we live in. It's not the world that I've seen in my 40 years on this earth, that's for sure. So what sort of lessons are we trying to teach our children? Are we just lying to them and selling them fairy tales? You know, this lesson about fair play is right up there with Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy. And by the way, if you got any children listening, I don't want you guys to think I'm saying Santa Claus isn't real. He's very real, and you better believe in him or you're not going to get any presents. But that aside, think about it, guys. These are the lessons that you're teaching your children. You're not teaching them how the world works. You might be teaching them how to work a minimum wage job, but you're not teaching them how to get to the top in the corporate world. You're not teaching them how to get to the top in the sports world. And you're sure not teaching them how to get to the top in any sort of political environment. That's not how anybody is successful. Winners don't cheat. Hell yeah, they do. That's the real world. So what sort of lessons are we trying to teach our children? We're trying to teach them how to be good people, and I can applaud that. I think we need a lot more good people in this world. But unless we change the way this world works, you're not preparing your children for success with that bullshit, that's for sure. Think about it. So there are some major ethical issues going on with the whole drug testing and banning of drugs in sports that no one ever wants to talk about because, you know, that would taint their version of reality, and you can't do that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.